Avoidant attachment is often misunderstood. Many people assume that someone who pulls away from emotional closeness simply doesn't care, but psychology tells us a much more complex story. Avoidant attachment is not about a lack of love, it is about a fear of vulnerability. It usually develops early in life when a person learns that relying on others may lead to disappointment, rejection, or emotional overwhelm. As a result, they become highly independent and unconsciously protect themselves by keeping emotional distance. This can make relationships confusing for both partners, especially when one person seeks closeness while the other withdraws. Understanding this pattern is not about making excuses for unhealthy behavior. It is about recognizing the emotional mechanisms behind it. The encouraging news is that attachment styles are learned patterns, not permanent identities. With self-awareness, emotional honesty, healthy boundaries, and a willingness to grow, people can move toward more secure and fulfilling relationships. The most important lesson is that lasting love is built not by chasing someone who keeps running, but by creating emotional safety, respecting yourself, and choosing connections where trust, communication, and mutual effort can truly thrive. Avoidant attachment is one of the most misunderstood relationship patterns in psychology. When people see someone consistently pulling away from emotional closeness, avoiding difficult conversations, or becoming distant just when a relationship begins to deepen, the first assumption is often that the person simply doesn't care. That assumption is usually inaccurate. In many cases, the behavior is not rooted in a lack of feelings, but in a deeply learned strategy for emotional protection. Understanding this distinction can completely change the way we view relationships, conflict, and emotional intimacy. It also helps us separate explanation from excuse. We can understand why someone behaves a certain way while still recognizing that unhealthy behaviors have real consequences for the people around them. Attachment theory suggests that our earliest experiences with caregivers help shape our expectations about relationships. When a child's emotional needs are consistently dismissed, minimized, or met with unpredictability, the child may learn that depending on others is risky. Instead of expressing vulnerability, they begin to rely almost entirely on themselves. Over time, this self-protective strategy becomes automatic. As adults, they may value independence so strongly that emotional closeness feels unfamiliar or even threatening. They are not consciously deciding to reject intimacy. Rather, their nervous system has learned to associate too much closeness with discomfort, pressure, or loss of control. What looks like confidence from the outside may actually be an emotional defense that has existed for years. This is why avoidant attachment should never be confused with emotional strength. True emotional strength includes the ability to trust, communicate honestly, tolerate vulnerability, and remain present during uncomfortable moments. Avoidant patterns often move in the opposite direction. Instead of addressing conflict directly, the person may withdraw. Instead of expressing fear, they may become silent. Instead of asking for support, they convince themselves they do not need anyone. These behaviors can create the illusion of stability, but beneath the surface, there is often significant emotional discomfort that remains unspoken. The challenge is that these defenses can work so well that the individual may not even recognize them as protective strategies anymore. At the same time, it is important not to stereotype every independent person as avoidantly attached. Enjoying personal space, valuing solitude, or having strong boundaries does not automatically indicate an attachment issue. Healthy independence allows someone to enjoy both closeness and autonomy without feeling threatened by either. Avoidant attachment, however, is characterized by emotional distancing that consistently interferes with intimacy. The difference lies not in how much alone time someone enjoys, but in whether emotional connection feels safe or overwhelming. This distinction helps prevent labels from being misused while encouraging a more accurate understanding of relationship behavior. Recognizing avoidant attachment is not about blaming parents or assigning fault for every relationship difficulty. Human development is complex, and many factors influence attachment patterns, including family dynamics, life experiences, trauma, and later relationships. The goal is not to look backward with resentment, but to look forward with awareness. When people understand the origins of their emotional habits, they gain the opportunity to make different choices. Awareness creates space for change, and change begins with recognizing patterns that once seemed automatic. Perhaps the most empowering truth is that attachment styles are not permanent identities. They are learned ways of relating that can evolve through self-reflection, healthy relationships, therapy, and consistent emotional practice. People can learn to tolerate vulnerability, communicate more openly, and develop greater emotional security over time. Growth does not happen overnight, and it requires patience and accountability, but it is absolutely possible. Understanding avoidant attachment is ultimately not about judging others. It is about recognizing that healing begins when we replace assumptions with knowledge, fear with awareness, and emotional distance with the courage to build healthier, more secure connections. One of the most confusing experiences in a relationship is watching someone move closer, show affection, express genuine interest, and then suddenly become emotionally distant. Many people interpret this behavior as a sign that the feelings were never real. They begin to question every conversation, every affectionate moment, and every promise that was made. However, when avoidant attachment is involved, the reality is often much more complicated. An avoidant person may genuinely care about their partner, yet still feel an overwhelming urge to create distance when emotional intimacy begins to deepen. This contradiction can be difficult to understand unless we recognize the psychological processes that drive it. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, closeness can activate an internal alarm system that developed long before the current relationship existed. Their mind may associate vulnerability with disappointment, emotional dependence, criticism, or loss of personal freedom. As the relationship becomes more meaningful, these unconscious fears begin to surface. Instead of experiencing intimacy as comforting, they may experience it as pressure. They are not necessarily afraid of the person they love. They are often afraid of the emotional exposure that love requires. Because these reactions happen automatically, they may not even realize why they suddenly feel the need to withdraw. This is why avoidant individuals sometimes send mixed signals. One day they may be warm, attentive, and emotionally available, and the next day they may become quiet, distracted, or difficult to reach. From the outside, this inconsistency appears confusing or even manipulative. In reality, many avoidant people are struggling with an internal conflict between their desire for connection and their instinct to protect themselves. They may enjoy companionship, but prolonged emotional closeness can leave them feeling overwhelmed. Rather than communicating these feelings openly, they often create distance because it feels safer than explaining emotions they barely understand themselves. Another common misunderstanding is believing that avoidant people simply do not value relationships. In many cases, they deeply value love and companionship, but have learned to prioritize self-reliance above emotional dependence. They may convince themselves that needing another person is a weakness or that expressing vulnerability will eventually lead to pain. As a result, they often suppress emotions, minimize relationship problems, or focus excessively on work, hobbies, or personal independence whenever emotional demands increase. These behaviors are not always intentional acts of rejection. They are coping mechanisms developed over many years. This pattern can be especially painful for partners who naturally seek reassurance and emotional closeness. The more one partner pursues connection, the more the avoidant partner may feel pressured, leading them to withdraw even further. This creates a cycle where both individuals feel misunderstood. One partner feels abandoned, while the other feels emotionally crowded. Without awareness of these attachment dynamics, both people may mistakenly blame each other instead of recognizing the underlying pattern that keeps repeating itself. Understanding why avoidant people pull away does not mean accepting unhealthy behavior or remaining in relationships where emotional needs are consistently ignored. Every healthy relationship requires communication, accountability, respect, and mutual effort. Explaining behavior is not the same as excusing it. An avoidant individual still has the responsibility to recognize their patterns and work toward healthier ways of relating. Likewise, their partner has the right to expect honesty, consistency, and emotional respect The encouraging reality is that this cycle can change. As avoidant individuals become more aware of their emotional triggers, they can learn to pause instead of withdrawing, communicate instead of disappearing, and tolerate vulnerability instead of fearing it. Secure relationships are built when both people feel safe expressing their needs without shame or fear. Caring about someone is important, but lasting relationships require more than feelings alone. They require the courage to remain emotionally present, even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. That courage is not something people are born with. It is something they can gradually develop through self-awareness, intentional practice, and a willingness to grow beyond old protective patterns. One of the biggest misconceptions about people with avoidant attachment is that they do not experience emotions deeply. Because they often appear calm, independent, or emotionally detached, others may assume they simply lack empathy or emotional investment. In reality, many avoidantly attached individuals experience a rich and complex emotional world, but they have learned to keep those emotions hidden even from themselves. What appears to be emotional coldness is often emotional suppression. Rather than openly expressing fear, sadness, disappointment, or even love, they unconsciously push these feelings aside because vulnerability has never felt completely safe. This pattern usually develops over many years. If a child grows up in an environment where emotional needs are dismissed, ignored, or criticized, they may gradually learn that expressing feelings leads nowhere. Instead of seeking comfort from others, they begin relying entirely on themselves. Over time, this self-reliance becomes more than a habit. It becomes an identity. As adults, they may pride themselves on being logical, independent, and unaffected by emotional situations. Yet beneath that composed exterior, many emotions remain unresolved because they were never given the opportunity to be acknowledged or processed in a healthy way. Emotional suppression is very different from emotional absence. Suppressing emotions does not make them disappear. It simply pushes them beneath conscious awareness. These hidden emotions often reveal themselves indirectly. An avoidant person may suddenly become irritable over a small disagreement, feel exhausted after emotionally intense conversations, or unexpectedly withdraw after experiencing a period of closeness. They may not recognize that these reactions are connected to deeper feelings of vulnerability, fear, or uncertainty. Instead, they may convince themselves that they simply need space, that relationships are becoming too demanding, or that independence will solve the discomfort they are experiencing. Many avoidant individuals also struggle to identify exactly what they are feeling. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as difficulty with emotional awareness or emotional labeling. Instead of recognizing sadness, they may interpret it as stress. Instead of acknowledging fear, they may describe it as annoyance. Instead of admitting loneliness, they may throw themselves into work, hobbies, or personal projects. This disconnect makes emotional communication incredibly difficult because it is hard to express emotions that you have never fully learned to recognize. Their silence is often less about secrecy and more about uncertainty. This hidden emotional world can create significant misunderstandings in relationships. Partners often assume that if someone does not openly express love, concern, or vulnerability, those feelings must not exist. Yet many avoidant individuals care deeply about the people in their lives. They may think about them constantly, worry about losing them, or miss them intensely after creating distance. However, because expressing these emotions feels unfamiliar or risky, they often remain unspoken. As a result, their actions and their inner experiences may not match, leaving both partners feeling confused and disconnected. It is also important to understand that emotional suppression comes with personal costs. Constantly pushing emotions aside requires mental energy. Over time, unresolved emotions can contribute to chronic stress, anxiety, emotional exhaustion, or difficulty maintaining long-term relationships. The very strategies that once protected someone from emotional pain may eventually become barriers to genuine connection. What once served as survival gradually begins limiting personal growth and relationship satisfaction. The encouraging news is that emotional awareness is a skill that can be developed. Through self-reflection, therapy, mindfulness, and supportive relationships, People with avoidant attachment can learn to identify, understand, and communicate their emotions more effectively. This process is rarely quick because it involves unlearning habits that may have existed since childhood. However, every small step toward emotional honesty strengthens the ability to form healthier relationships. True emotional security does not come from avoiding feelings or pretending they do not exist. It comes from recognizing that emotions are valuable sources of information, and that allowing trusted people to see our authentic emotional experiences is not a sign of weakness, but one of the greatest expressions of courage and personal growth. One of the most frustrating relationship patterns is the cycle of chasing and withdrawing. One person feels the relationship slipping away, so they try harder. They call more often, send longer messages, ask for reassurance, and search for answers. The other person, instead of responding with greater closeness, becomes even more distant. This can leave both individuals feeling confused and hurt. To someone who does not understand attachment theory, it may seem irrational. Why would someone pull away when another person is clearly showing love and commitment? The answer often lies in how an avoidantly attached person experiences emotional pressure. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, closeness is not always interpreted as comfort. When a partner repeatedly seeks reassurance or pushes for emotional conversations, the avoidant person's nervous system may interpret those moments as overwhelming rather than supportive. It is not necessarily the affection itself that creates discomfort, but the feeling that they are losing control over their personal space or emotional independence. As a result, they instinctively create distance to restore a sense of safety. This reaction is usually automatic rather than intentional, which is why many avoidant individuals struggle to explain their behavior even when asked directly. The more one partner chases, the more the avoidant partner may feel trapped. This creates what psychologists often describe as the anxious avoidance cycle. The anxious partner fears abandonment and responds by seeking more connection. The avoidant partner fears emotional engulfment and responds by creating more distance. Ironically, both people are attempting to protect themselves from emotional pain, but their coping strategies directly trigger each other's deepest fears. One feels ignored, while the other feels overwhelmed. Without recognizing this pattern, both partners may mistakenly believe the relationship is failing because of personality differences rather than incompatible coping mechanisms. Many people believe that if they just love an avoidant partner enough, remain patient enough, or prove their loyalty often enough, the avoidant person will finally feel safe. While kindness, consistency, and understanding certainly matter, constantly chasing someone rarely creates genuine emotional security. In fact, excessive pursuit can unintentionally reinforce the avoidant person's belief that closeness always comes with pressure, expectations, or emotional demands. Instead of feeling understood, they may feel responsible for managing another person's emotional state, which increases their desire to withdraw. This does not mean partners should become emotionally distant or stop expressing their needs. Healthy relationships require honest communication, emotional openness, and mutual support. The difference lies in how those needs are communicated. Respectful conversations, clear boundaries, and allowing each person time to process emotions often create a safer environment than repeated demands for immediate reassurance. Emotional safety grows when both partners feel heard rather than pressured. Secure relationships are built through cooperation, not through one person constantly pursuing while the other constantly escapes. It is equally important for the avoidant individual to take responsibility for their own patterns. Wanting space is healthy, but disappearing without explanation, avoiding every difficult conversation, or refusing emotional accountability damages trust over time. Personal growth involves learning that intimacy does not automatically threaten independence. It means discovering that healthy relationships allow room for both closeness and individuality. Emotional maturity requires remaining present even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable, instead of immediately retreating whenever emotions become intense. For the partner who has been doing the chasing, one of the most powerful lessons is realizing that you cannot force another person to feel emotionally safe. You cannot heal someone else's attachment wounds through endless reassurance, sacrifice, or persistence. Lasting change must come from the individual who recognizes their own patterns and chooses to work on them. Your responsibility is not to rescue someone from their fears, but to care for your own emotional well-being while maintaining healthy boundaries. Sometimes the healthiest response is not to chase harder, but to create enough space for both people to reflect honestly on what they need and whether they are equally willing to build a relationship based on trust, communication, and mutual emotional responsibility. One of the most hopeful discoveries in modern psychology is that attachment styles are not permanent. Many people hear the term avoidant attachment and assume it describes a fixed personality trait that can never change. This belief often leads to hopelessness, both for the individual who recognizes these patterns in themselves and for the people who care about them. The truth is far more encouraging. Attachment styles are learned patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving in relationships. Because they are learned, they can also be reshaped through awareness, consistent effort, and healthier experiences. Change may not happen quickly, but it is absolutely possible for someone with avoidant attachment to develop a more secure way of relating to others. The first step toward change is self-awareness. Many avoidantly attached individuals spend years believing that their discomfort with closeness is simply part of who they are. They may describe themselves as someone who just needs a lot of space or doesn't like emotional conversations. While everyone has unique preferences, it becomes important to ask whether those preferences are freely chosen or driven by fear. Self-awareness allows a person to recognize recurring patterns, such as pulling away after intimacy, avoiding vulnerability, minimizing emotions, or ending relationships when they begin to feel too serious. Recognizing these behaviors without shame is the beginning of meaningful growth. Another important factor is understanding how the brain adapts over time. The human brain has an incredible ability to form new neural pathways through repeated experiences, a process known as neuroplasticity. This means that old emotional habits do not have to define the future. Every time someone chooses honest communication instead of withdrawal, expresses a feeling instead of suppressing it, or remains present during emotional discomfort instead of escaping it, they strengthen healthier patterns. These small moments may seem insignificant, but repeated consistently, they gradually reshape how the brain responds to closeness and trust. Growth is built through many small decisions rather than one dramatic breakthrough. Healthy relationships can also play a powerful role in changing attachment patterns. A secure, emotionally mature partner cannot fix an avoidant person, but they can provide an environment where trust can slowly develop. Consistency, respect, honest communication, and healthy boundaries create opportunities for new relational experiences. Over time, an avoidant individual may begin to realize that vulnerability does not always lead to rejection, and that expressing needs does not automatically result in criticism or loss of independence. These corrective emotional experiences help challenge beliefs that may have been carried since childhood. Professional support is often another valuable part of the healing process. Therapy provides a safe space to explore early experiences, identify emotional triggers, and develop healthier coping strategies. It is not about blaming parents or reliving every painful memory. Instead, it focuses on understanding how past experiences continue to influence present relationships. A therapist can help individuals recognize defensive patterns, improve emotional awareness, and practice communication skills that may never have been learned earlier in life. Seeking help should never be viewed as weakness. In reality, acknowledging the need for growth requires significant courage and emotional maturity. Of course, change is rarely linear. There will be moments when old habits return, especially during periods of stress or conflict. An avoidantly attached person may still feel the urge to withdraw, become emotionally distant, or avoid difficult conversations. The difference is that increased awareness creates the opportunity to make different choices. Instead of automatically following old patterns, they can pause, reflect, and respond more intentionally. Progress is measured not by perfection, but by a growing ability to stay emotionally present, even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. Perhaps the most important lesson is that healing cannot be forced by someone else. No amount of love, patience, or sacrifice from a partner can create lasting change unless the individual genuinely wants to understand themselves and grow. Real transformation begins with personal responsibility. It involves accepting that while the past may explain current behaviors, it does not have to determine the future. Secure attachment is not about becoming emotionally perfect or never experiencing fear again. It is about learning that closeness and independence can exist together, that vulnerability can strengthen rather than weaken relationships, and that genuine connection becomes possible when we replace fear with honesty, avoidance with communication, and self-protection with the courage to trust again. One of the hardest lessons to learn in relationships is that you cannot heal another person's attachment wounds by sacrificing your own emotional well-being. Many people spend months or even years believing that if they are patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough, or forgiving enough, the other person will finally change. They begin adjusting their own needs, walking on eggshells to avoid conflict, making excuses for inconsistent behavior, and convincing themselves that one more conversation or one more chance will make everything different. While compassion is an important part of any healthy relationship, there is a significant difference between supporting someone's growth and becoming responsible for it. The moment your happiness depends entirely on changing another person, you begin losing sight of your own emotional health. People who become involved with an avoidantly attached partner often fall into the habit of constantly monitoring the relationship. They analyze every text message, every period of silence, every change in tone, and every canceled plan, hoping to find reassurance that everything is okay. Over time, their focus shifts away from themselves and becomes centered on predicting or managing the other person's behavior. This emotional hypervigilance is exhausting. Instead of asking, "Am I happy in this relationship?" they begin asking, "What can I do to make them stay?" That subtle shift changes everything because it places your emotional stability in someone else's hands. Healing begins when you redirect that attention inward. Instead of trying to understand every action of another person, start becoming curious about your own emotional patterns. Ask yourself why inconsistency feels acceptable, why you are afraid to express your needs, or why you believe love must be earned through endless patience and sacrifice. These questions are not meant to create guilt. They are invitations for self-awareness. Every relationship teaches us something, not only about the other person, but also about ourselves. Understanding your own attachment style, emotional triggers, and relationship expectations allows you to make healthier decisions in the future. Healthy boundaries are another essential part of personal healing. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls that push people away, but they actually create the conditions for healthier relationships. A boundary simply communicates what behavior you are willing to accept and what behavior you are not. For example, you can respect someone's need for personal space while also making it clear that disappearing for weeks without communication is not acceptable to you. Boundaries are not punishments or ultimatums. They are acts of self-respect that protect your emotional well-being while allowing relationships to remain honest and balanced. Self-worth also plays a central role in healing. When people doubt their own value, they often tolerate relationships that provide very little emotional security. They may mistake unpredictability for passion or emotional distance for mystery. In reality, healthy love should not leave you constantly questioning where you stand. A secure relationship creates room for honesty, mutual effort, respect, and emotional consistency. It is normal for couples to experience disagreements or periods of stress, but those challenges should lead to communication rather than repeated cycles of avoidance and uncertainty. Remember that your worth is not determined by someone's ability or inability to connect with you emotionally. Another important truth is that choosing yourself does not mean giving up on love. It means refusing to abandon your own needs in the pursuit of someone else's approval. Sometimes the healthiest decision is to step back from relationships that repeatedly leave you emotionally drained, regardless of how much potential you believe they have. Love should inspire growth in both people, not require one person to carry the emotional weight of the entire relationship. You deserve a connection where care, effort, and vulnerability flow in both directions. Ultimately, the goal is not to become an expert at fixing avoidant people. The goal is to become someone who recognizes healthy relationships, communicates openly, maintains strong boundaries, and values emotional reciprocity. Healing is about developing the confidence to choose relationships that bring peace rather than constant confusion. When you invest in your own emotional growth, you become less focused on chasing unavailable people and more focused on building genuine connections with those who are willing to meet you with the same honesty, respect, and commitment. That is where lasting security begins. Not in changing someone else, but in creating a life where your own emotional well-being is no longer dependent on another person's willingness to heal.